sure I'm on silent.
Yeah, phone's on silent.
Please, everyone. Right, good morning everyone. Welcome to the Fire and Rescues Community Safety Committee. Firstly, apologies for absence. We've got Councillor Colton.
Yes, I have apologies from Councillor Scott Carlton, Chair.
And I believe Councillor Neil's just running a little bit late. Any declarations of interest from anyone? No? Perfect. Then we have the minutes of the meeting from the 19th of March. That's pages 3 to 6 of your agenda. I'll move those.
Seconded.
Thanks, Nick. Is there any questions, comments, bits of accuracy on the minutes?
I wasn't here.
I wasn't here.
I wasn't here. So we're all trusting you, Nick.
They're fine, yeah.
Perfect. So if we're all happy to accept those, we'll accept the minutes. Thank you very much. And then, without further ado, I'm moving on to item 4, which is the service delivery performance reports, pages 7 to 16 on your agenda. Craig?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. For Councillor Cubley, and I suppose really not so much for Councillor Theodora, because you've obviously been here before, but this is basically a bit of a performance update for service delivery, so the three elements of that being prevention, protection and response. Response is the easy one, the fire engines running under blue lights to things. Protection is the one which is our statutory duties about enforcement of the fire safety order, so non-domestic premises, and then prevention is all the community safety stuff. You see the crews and staff in your communities doing stuff. And this report really just gives you a flavour and an overview. It certainly doesn't cover everything we do in service, but it's actually some of the more salient points in the previous quarter for you to kind of have a view of what the service is actually doing. Also to introduce, who's going to present the report to you is Area Manager Mick Sharman. Mick Sharman is the Area Manager for the response element. Your other Area Manager in terms of service delivery is Area Manager Bryn Coleman, and Bryn oversees prevention and protection. And the two obviously have to work very, very closely together because it's the same people doing very similar things across the three functions. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an overview there as well. But if I can, Chair, hand over to Area Manager Sharman.
Absolutely correct. Thank you, Chair. Morning, councillors. Just for point, unfortunately, Area Manager can't be with us this morning, so I'll cover the full report off and take any questions that I'll give it. I'll jump straight into the report. And I'll touch on the more pertinent bits of the report. A total of 2,408 incidents was attended by the service during the period of 1st of February to 30th of April. That is a slight increase on previous year of 164 incidents. Incidents of note that I draw the committee's attention to is that we've received 528 deliberate fires, which is an increase of 161 compared to the same period. We've seen a spike in particular areas through the county of deliberate fires, and so there is action that's been undertaken to both address this. But a good example is the Oak Tree Estate in Mansfield, where we've seen an increase as the weather's got it's been a lot brighter and a lot sunnier, and the weather's got a lot better. What we tend to find is that the weather conditions dry out, that can lead to an increase in deliberate fire setting. So we're very conscious of that, and we're working with our partners to address that. Working through the report, on paragraph 2.2, it talks about breakdown of the operational incidents, and one of the statistics that is pleasing to report is during that period we had 0 RTC road traffic collision activities, which is always pleasing to report. Further on, as we move through the report, I draw your attention to paragraph 2.3. As part of the strategic plan, the service has a attendance standard where we will try and attend emergency incidents in an average of 8 minutes. Again, it's really pleasing to report that we've met that standard and exceeded that standard during the reported period. And we've reported 7 minutes and 57 seconds on average to attend operational incidents. Within the report, it further breaks down how we attend those incidents with priority 1, priority 2, priority 3 and false alarms. Priority 1 being the most significant incidents in terms of where there is potential of life risk. Priority 2 is where there is potentially a building or an environmental risk. and lower down priority 3 is where there is, it could pose potential harm for life and environment, but it is generally less severe than the other 2 previous ones. I think it's also worth pointing out that during the last year and over the past few years, we've actually increased our attendance time by 5 seconds. Now, it's only 5 seconds, but as you can appreciate, there's a lot of work gone into that 5 seconds, because we are battling against great levels of congestion, different road conditions, road closures, and places like Clifton Bridge closures, and all have a significant impact on our ability to get to where we need to be. To actually report to a committee that we've made an improvement of 5 seconds is a significant improvement, and I'm really pleased about that. I think we have to be very careful with, when I'm talking about some of the things on this report, when we compare it to last year, because last year was very unique in terms of the implications of COVID, and I think what we'll see as we report further on throughout the year is if we do a like-for-like comparison, it might not be a true reflection, Chair, so there's a question of whether I extend the reporting period so we can put more context around it. I think that's something we need to consider so we can draw some good conclusions from the data. 2.5 reports on our availability of our on-call appliances, and this is an example of the point I was just trying to stress about the implications of COVID. Whilst we've achieving the required standards that are set by the service, it is a decrease in availability of 4% compared to previous time last year. And that's primarily to do, a positive implication of COVID was that we increased availability because individuals were either furloughed or away from their primary employment, which meant they could give more availability to their on-call duties. So that's one thing where we will try to maintain that, but it will be a challenge this year. I'll just quickly take you down to 2.7, which gives a quick overview of how we are comparing to previous years. And again, it's very pleasing to see that we report an average availability of 93% last year, compared to the 2 previous years of 89% and 86%. So we're in the right direction. We're doing really well. And as I reported to the members' seminar, is that many fire and rescue services would look enviously on what the levels that we report. And that doesn't mean we take it for granted, but that just means that we are really pleased and proud of the work that our on-call employees do and the level of commitment that they show to both the service and the local communities. I'll just quickly come to the end of the response section and draw members' attention to 2.9. As part of the COVID restrictions, we limited certain activities, and one of those activities was operational exercising in the traditional form of going to different work environments, different places throughout the county, and practicing preparing for potential incidents. We've carried on doing that activity in a different kind of way using technology or looking at it in different formats, but I'm pleased to report since May the 17th and the relaxing of some of the COVID restrictions, we've now got the operational exercise programme up and running, and I'll actually report on how that's going at the future committee. Chair, I don't know if you want me to pause on the response element before I go on to the...
Let's just stop there for a second, Mick. Thank you for that. Is there any questions or points of clarification or anything so far? Yes, Ed, go for it.
Yeah, just one. The increase in deliberate fires, do you think that's more about because of the lockdown and people being not at schools, not at colleges, not at work?
It potentially is, Councillor. What we've the Oak Tree estate is we've continually had. It's not a new area that we've always had a long history of some sort of problems there. And it could be linked to that. What we tend to find is that it is the local crews working with the local police have always determined, and we can almost tie it down to those hours, certain hours in the day where it occurs. and not to cast aspersions of how it happens, but it's almost we're linked to some of the school opening times and closing times, which so we're working with the police and and local partners to see what we can do for that in terms of both education and also sort of other preventative measures. It is an ongoing challenge.
You mentioned Oak Tree
Yeah.
as a particular hotspot. Is that a huge percentage of these increases? And I guess the question for us is, what's the remedy? Because obviously we can't police it. What partners are we working with, and what sort of action plans the local council and the police?
I can bring more details about council on that.
In
What I am aware of is working with the local authority, working with the local education partners, trying to get into schools so we can do that level of education. It is. I think COVID has exacerbated it a little bit in terms of schools are very much focused on on their education, catching up, and quite rightly so. And so I think we need to try harder to get into some of those education settings, so we can talk about the implications of these incidents. But we must do that.
I think just for the safety committee, places like Oak Tree, places like Oak Tree, we know they are challenging places as an estate in terms of demographic, and I think it'd be wrong to ignore that. But certainly I think former councillor Vaughan Hopewell was very much as part of that as the fire authority, which was great as well. So we do know these things happen. It's seasonal as well, in all honesty. Every year the weather gets better, the summer comes out, people start going in the water and start going for walks and doing things in sort of like the fields and the woods. So it's not unknown to us, but the percentage increase, we'd have to have a look at whether, compared to last year, it's significantly different in Oak Tree, but we do know there are particular places in the county and city that are seasonal or time of day or night where we're going to get these issues.
There's a particular problem, area of high deprivation in East Mansfield, but I think we should watch it. Patience, sorry.
Yeah, I thought it was because of COVID, that was why the increase. But do you think, is it the increase in the incident, is it mostly the time of COVID lockdown? And now that things are easing up a little bit, is there any difference?
Yeah, I think during the period of COVID lockdown we did see a decrease in all incidents across the board. And whether there is that sense of mental frustration now coming out of COVID, some of the restrictions, that might be adding to the level of anxiety within the community. But the local crews who have been working with partners, they almost feel that they can almost track it in terms of whereabouts it is, and they're working with and they do feel that it's linked to some of the younger people in terms of school and education, and when schools open, we don't get those deliberate fires when the children are in schools. It's when they come out of those schools or during school holidays that we find that we get those spikes.
Yeah, I think devil makes for idle handlers, but Councillor Copley, go.
You mentioned about education going into the schools. Do you actually have anything in place or anything coming into place to actually go into the schools and try and tackle this head on before
we do, Councillor, and we're very proactive. And we have education packages and education teams that proactively work with schools in terms of delivering both sort of fire awareness and fire prevention kind of measures, and that starts all the way from infantation groups all the way through, because there are obviously different challenges depending on different age groups, and very much so, and particularly with the older end, we're very proactive in talking about what the implications of this, and not just the implications of the damage that you're doing, but cause it implications on other people and the consequences of it, the legal consequences. We do that alongside partners. It will have been challenging over the past year because of the COVID restrictions, and you can imagine schools have been very limited in terms of some schools have been very much focused on the curriculum, and some of the partnership and activities have been more challenging because certain schools want to basically focus and put time into getting those students back to where they believe they should be. So it's more hard work that we need to undertake to make sure that we can do it.
If I could check, the schools are in, I think they're a challenge because the curriculum they have to deliver And then we've got obviously multiple partners, depending on the area, wanting time in the curriculum in the day, because it's a captive audience. But it is a really good opportunity to do other things rather than the prevention. So even things like recruitment for cadet schemes that we do as well. So there may be areas, so in the city, for example, we may want to target some of the schools for cadet schemes, you know, in terms of like some of the gang issues that you're working with in the city, or even Oak Tree Lane Estate, because we can do some diversion and distraction initiatives with the, well, not the younger ones, but the teen sort of era as well, because they might want to see this as a future of employment for them, so we might be positive role models to them as well. So we try and sort of the every contact counts is what we're talking about. So we can do the prevention, protection bit, but we can also do things like positive action as well with the younger age group. So but it is challenging to get into the education system just because of the challenges they face to deliver a curriculum.
Would members find it useful if the next committee we had a bit of an education report about what we do, where we go, how we work, and maybe even, Mick, if it could be arranged that when we get our teams into a school that we can have a committee visit and we can actually see one of the sessions being delivered or something if people want to do that. I think that might be useful. Also, I mean, don't forget that we're all counsellors with relationships with schools, particularly, you know, we're all upper tier counsellors, so if you're having a challenge, we've obviously got a lot of links in with governors and head teachers, so I understand how pressured they are to play catch up now after a year, but if we've got a relationship that can say give us a morning, that might help. Or if you've got a particular school where you want help, or you want us in a school, let's do that. I think that'd be really good. Before we move on to the rest of the report, I do think we ought to minute our recognition of how well we've done on response times. I think that's fantastic. And just for my own debate, you didn't think you'd get away with, I still think there's work to do on Ashfield and Retford on call. And I would like to see, not necessarily a committee, but maybe background papers of whatever plan we've got to try and get that to be the best it can be. I appreciate how challenging it is. It's forever going to be a challenging beast. But
I think I prepare myself every committee chair, and quite rightly so, as your role as those authority members, to make sure we're keeping us head in the game. There is no doubt it is challenging still. On call, just more broadly, Manager Sean is now sort of introducing a piece of work over the coming months around remuneration for being on call. So hopefully that will reflect, you know, it's not going to double salary for on-call firefighters, but hopefully it will be more appealing. And hopefully that will be one way of dealing with it, but it continues to be a massive national problem.
it is. And just as, you know, as long as we put a marker down that we're watching to try and make it the best it can be. Mick, do you want to carry on with the report? Oh, sorry, have members got anything? Sorry.
No, just on that point again, it's very good that we've made those studies. I mean, I'm just noticing that Southall again remains a problem, 2.7. Doesn't say how bad that is, but I mean, we still have difficulties.
Well, Mr. Chair, sorry, Councillor, what I can assure you is that we have made improvements within the Southall area in terms of the appliances availability, and we've done that through a number of measures. Southall, if I can be honest, somewhere I feel like because of the demographics of Southall, in terms of the traditional types of individuals that undertake the role as on call, there just seem to be less opportunities within Southall, and that's probably one of the reasons that we do struggle. But we have made some significant improvements, and I would have to, I'm not going to guess at the figures, Councillor, but what I'm confident is it has improved, and I believe we have a upper figure of 85%, and we have a lower figure that we won't go beyond, which is 75%. Sorry, 70%. And I would need to double check.
Just, if I could for members, on page 16, Appendix A, if you talk about on-call appliance availability, and it's itemised per section. Just to give you some context, Councillor, about Southall, I think I recall only a couple of 3 years ago we were at something like 40%, 30 and 40% coverage. Now that's not, there's not kind of like a massive science that's gone into doing this. You know, we've been very fortunate. Some of our whole-time firefighters that work for us are now dual contracts at Southall as well. So that's made a difference. If I was to pick out one thing there, so people moving into the area that already work for us in the whole time are now providing cover. So Predominantly they could be supervisory managers, because that is something that is really problematic on the on-call. So when I sort of see figures of Southwell sort of 72%, I'm kind of rubbing my hands together with that, without complacency as well. But having seen the improvement, but as I say, I think Emma and Sean's right, Southwell has become an area that is a very, very hard nut to crack in terms of recruitment.
Appreciate you drawing our attention to that. It does also draw members' attention to the last column, which has shown a decrease in every area. I know Councillor Cumberland is going to jump on Eastwood, which is the second highest, and Eastwood's not got the same challenges as Southwell. So we'll fall into a different debate in a moment. It's Southwell-Southwell debate. It's an area both Eddie and I know well. Is there a particular? I'm not wishing to ask your question, but is there a particular plan to resolve in Eastwood Station?
I think the Deputy Fire Chief's picked up the pertinent point is that we've had a model that is a nationally agreed model that recruits for. What we're trying to do locally is look at improving that model to what we think is more flexible and will offer us to recruit from a broader range of people. Because a commitment currently on the current terms and conditions could be that you have to do 84 hours. Anything between 84 hours up to 120 hours on a part-time basis when you're in your second. It's a real challenging commitment. So I think doing things differently will have the potential to open the open and increase opportunities, regardless whether it's at Southwell or Eastwood. The reason that there's a decrease in the quarter is because the previous point I made is that quarter is reporting against when we was in COVID restrictions. So if I was to do this, and I think we've got to be, like I said, we've got to be a little bit better in terms of how we report it. Because if I was reporting against the previous year, or previous 2 years, I would like to think you would actually see the improvements that we've made. So I think that's important.
Okay, so I hope we'll agree that I think we should extend the reporting period so that the comparison data is more valuable for everything we do, all of those, because obviously COVID was an anomaly year, so we are reporting apples and oranges there. So I think we'll agree, we'll give you that flexibility to provide us more valuable data. Just in terms of governance, the project that you're working on call, does that come through us to make a recommendation to the employment committees or vice versa? And what sort of time frame have we got? Because obviously we're keen to keep an eye on it as well as the functional bit.
Yeah, I suppose really, with it being a pilot, we're going to see if it works, or how confident we are it can work in more broadly across the service. And then I think we need to factor in what's going to be the financial implications of being able to sustain it. And I would hope then we can either come to an HR committee because it's a people thing, or finance and resources committee because it's more of a money thing that we need to kind of look to the authority to kind of help us support and deliver. I think to us there, I think we're talking about a year to kind of see if it works.
Yeah, the trial, we're looking to undertake the trial from September onwards, and we believe we're going to bring regular monitoring back to the senior leadership team, and we believe that we'll move at least 6 months to a year, depending on to be able to see the impacts of the recruitment and retention. But as you asked for there, Chair, when we talked about you set the market down for what we're doing for the on-call, I think we could definitely include that within the future report to talk about and give an overview of the activities we're doing, which includes those activities. Yeah, I think
Well, I think when it gets to the right point, this committee would like to see that data, even if it's moving data 6 months, 9 months, 12 months.
Yeah.
And I think it should be for this committee then to support the recommendations of the HR committee, so that we're joining up and saying we're together as a larger part of the authority, saying this is a valuable thing that we get to. Is there anything else before I let Nick go on? I thought this would be a quick item.
Yeah, sorry,
and just for members, I intend for these committees to be conversational, so that we can pick out stuff. So it doesn't need to be that formal. Let's get out the questions we need to get out. So Nick, do you want to make some progress?
I will do it. COVID-19 partnership work continues. The bit that I will just highlight for you, there's 2 things that I think are absolutely fantastic. 2.15 identifies that the service staff that have been seconded to undertake and support the administration of vaccinations. We've delivered over 50,000 vaccinations. So, and that is absolutely fantastic from the volunteers, and a real credit to them. The other point I would pick out is that it's not stopped, we continue, and as pointed out in 2.16, we was very much at the centre of supporting Operation Golden City, which was to counter the effects of the Indian variant, and it was the mass testing of individuals, so the service was very much at the forefront of that activity as well, working with obviously local partners. Very quickly through the prevention part of the report, it's pleasing to report that even though due to COVID restrictions, we did 6,453 physical or virtual safe and well visits last year, and it's pleasing to report that we are hitting a lot of those for the targeted people that we need to, in terms of individuals that are over 65 or individuals that have identified as having a disability, which all align to our Charlie profile, which talks about which people are at risk in the event of a fire, so that's pleasing to report. Because of COVID restrictions now reducing, we are back, we're back where we need to be and where we want to be, at the centre of our communities, delivering more physical visits rather than the virtual visits, with the aim of striving towards the service goal of 12,000 safe and well visits this year. Other activities continue from the prevention perspective. We've been very busy carrying out community reassurance and engagement activities. We carry out this activity post a serious domestic event, usually a fire that's related in somebody's either a serious incident or an injury or fatality as a result of that, where we try and give confidence to the local community by delivering targeted and whether it's the right term, we swamp the area with resources, so we give them that reassurance. We continue to do direct engagement, targeting areas that we feel that will get the most benefit from, and where we feel that the people are most at risk. We did an area, a complex at West Bridgeford, Rivermead House, which gave that as a property more confidence and reassurance. Chair, would you like to go into the protection, or is there any questions on the prevention?
Do you want to finish protection as well, and then we'll take it all together?
Protection, again, has been very proactive with regards to the activities that's been undertaken during this period, which is still partly under the COVID restrictions. But just to give members the assurance is that the teams are very active. They might have had to change the way that they did things, but as we come out of COVID restrictions, we can change back to the more traditional and probably more effective, but still learn lessons from what we were doing in the past. So I think that's particularly important. Some things work better, and we've learned that, and it's forced us to look at where we deliver activities. Members will be aware that we had a large industrial fire. Also, members will be aware to the Accident Repair Centre on Plumtree Road. One of the activities similar to what I've just talked about, the domestic setting, is that the protection and operational crews will carry out what they call a business reassurance engagement. So it's capturing all those businesses around where they've had that incident to give them confidence and to make sure that they fully understand their responsibilities in terms of compliance. The service and particularly the protection team continue to invest and upskill their members, and we've got two that are undertaking the fire engineering qualification, which are really pleasing to see, and credit to those individuals for the commitment that they're doing with regards to that. Lastly, I'll just point out too that the service continues to respond to some of the recommendations from the Grenfell inquiry. And one of those is about upskilling operational personnel with fire protection training, and service as an extensive training programme that's doing that, where we're going to qualify and improve the training of our supervisory managers. It's a long system we do, but we're well on our way to that, Chair.
Thank you. Members, any questions, comments? Nick?
Yeah, thanks for that. Just based on that, in terms of the cladding, Grenfell and the rejects, there's some great work being done on that. I mean, do we still have significant problems or concerns about residential buildings in the city with that type of cladding?
Councillor, myself or the deputy will pick on it, so I know the deputy works a lot closer with that. But yes, I think from it's always surprising that the level when we're carrying out activities with the in partnership as part of the J. I think what's always surprising is the ongoing fire safety measures of those buildings, and it is often reported the number of breaches that we tend to find, and we tend to work with partners to be able to determine what they are. But I do believe there is a significant, still a significant concern that that level of investment is critical for a number of reasons. And we have some ageing building stock, and over a period of time, well, to be honest, it's not just aging building stock, it's new builds. We certainly do need to be proactive in these types of buildings. Yes.
Yeah, if I could, Chair. I think my concern as the Deputy Chief in Nottinghamshire Council is that the January back in did a report around the system being fractured and broken, both from design, approval, build, refurbishment, repurpose and enforcement. And there's no doubt there's some absolute challenges across the regulatory bodies, so local authority, fire and others. I think what the joint team in the city is doing is actually focusing those resources, as you know with your experience anyway with this. That work will continue. Our commitment is that work will continue with the city. I think what we are seeing in the city because of the focus is that pretty much every building or 3/4 of the buildings we find has some kind of deficiency. And that is now enabling us to target probably various property types. I think there's some lobbying to be done nationally, and certainly through the National Fire Chiefs Council. There's obviously the new building safety regulator that's coming in, so that'll add another dynamic. So as a fire authority, we'll have ourselves in terms of enforcing the legislation. We'll have the local authority through the Housing Act or environmental health and those issues, and we'll have the building safety regulator for high-rise premises. And that's going to have to take some working through. What our intention is, hopefully through Area Manager Coleman next time, bringing reports around building regulation update. So what's the building safety regulator going to add to the fire safety order that we enforce and the local authority? So that'll give a bit of context for you about where we're going. Fire protection, if I'm truly honest, I'm always going to have a focus on response. I want an excellent service and response, and myself and Area Manager Sean, we were talking about this the other day, but fire protection is the area of growth and very much the area of focus, and it will be for some years. I think Grenfell has opened a can of worms, in all honesty. I think if we've seen the inquiry footage that Sir Martin Woodbeck is actually going through, some of the admissions of some of the questions that are being said are quite frightening for me as a fire officer, I have to say. But what we do have to focus on, there was part of the inquiry that looked at the response, of London Fire Brigade, but then it's asked questions of the fire sector. And we have got some learning to do, and national guidance that we're implementing. Hopefully we'll deal with the response. But fire protection is going to need some investment. And I think what we're hoping to do is give you some reassurance that for many years fire crews haven't really done the formal training in fire protection. And I made a decision a couple of years ago that we would train all of our crews in fire protection, and we would qualify our watch and crew managers so that they could basically do that lower level stuff. So basically they can do the mass numbers, find the themes, and then we can target our fire safety inspectors with fire engineering degrees to the actual higher risk areas. So I think what we're going to do, particularly things like the city where there's lots of construction and other sort of larger towns, we're going to have to keep very close to it. It certainly does give me a concern. It's probably the one area of the business, I have to say, that it gives me more concern than the response bit.
I guess there's work to be done through local authorities with planning policy as well for new builds. I know a lot of stuff's coming out nationally, but the development control side of things need to be robust, and we need to be feeding into that through planning authorities.
I think there's certainly been an allegation or challenge about the quality assurance process of build. So where they've done, even the sort of whether it's true or not, but it's certainly an anecdote out there that where you've moved from local authority quality assurance through building control to the approved inspector, Now, I haven't got any evidence in my pocket that says that's true or not, but it's certainly a conversation that's happening as part of the building process about where the approved inspectors sit as opposed to a local authority. They understand why approved inspectors, the notion of them were brought in around competition and challenge and choice and variety. But that's one part of the process. I think from our perspective, we would like people to involve us a lot more, and we would actually like them to listen to us when we give them some feedback a lot more, because I know that when the fire protection officers go out, when the building's been used for a couple of years, we will go back in and see things that could have been put right at the build stage, and we will start adding notices of deficiency or enforcement or prohibition of buildings. And we're not talking about necessarily the old stock, we're talking about relatively new buildings on some occasions, or new buildings. So things where they've put cables through a building, where they've compromised the compartments, so drill a hole in the wall, put a cable through, but then they've not sealed it properly. Now, if you think about a cable running through a building, that could be hundreds, if not thousands, of holes in a building, and that adds to the dynamic. And then firefighters may turn up and see a building that's not acting as they would expect it to act in a fire. So a fire doesn't stay in the compartment, it's actually moving outside of the compartment. That's partly of Grenfell. You know, it's going up the cladding, it's going in through the windows, and then it's getting into the compartments where before it was designed as a concrete box, and it would be held in the concrete box, and it wouldn't break out until fire crews have got there and dealt with the fire. So we are seeing buildings built differently, timber buildings. Q building, which was a building in Manchester, student accommodation, didn't respond in the way it did. But equally the thing about the fire service is we can't say that this is new to us. There are examples of these fires over a couple of decades at least, not only in this country but around the world. So there is, you know, we can't be complacent. We've got to open our eyes and make sure we do some learning and what we're doing about it.
I guess, has that answered your question?
It has. I mean, I'm going to make an excessively political point about it, but I'm with you, I think, in terms of how planning's been relaxed to a certain extent, and I understand why, in order to get buildings up and to make more profit. And obviously, coming out of what we've just come out of now, you'd expect that to continue. So I've got concerns about that, and I'm also concerned, as I'm sure everybody is, that there's known hazards with types of cladding and those sort of buildings. We've seen horrific incidents in London. There are still buildings up and down the country where we know those hazards exist, where they're a danger to the residents' lives and to the firefighters who are going to go into them. And yet nothing substantial has been done. I don't think it's the fight with the fire authority, but you know, somebody somewhere, obviously from Westminster, where else needs to fund us to be able to get rid of this stuff, because we know that there's dangers there.
I think as kind of one of your strategic advisors, my view for fire authorities, as I said, is that protection is an area of growth, and that's going to be a challenge in terms of funding for the fire service generally, and where the authority wishes to put that funding, what advice I can give you over the coming years about where I think that money should be. But fire protection is potentially an area that if we don't make sure we either grow, evolve, or make sure we're as good as we can be, because I think enforcement is going to have to be utilised more. Now that clearly costs money to enforce, and you don't always recoup your costs as a fire authority from the people you've enforced against, and that is public money and that's limited. What I am doing with the city, I'm actually meeting my counterparts in the city through regulation and enforcement, and we are going to have a look at, well, how do we provide regulation and enforcement as a collective more strategically in the city in particular. It's less of an issue clearly in the sort of the larger town things, so the risk is predominantly in the city. But I think there is something around enforcement that we're going to have to start showing our teeth more. There's been a drive through regulators code that we're not due to be a burden on business. And I think there's even a paragraph in the regulators code that's not to be overly burdensome on business. I kind of absolutely get that, but when it gets wrong, the spotlight's going to be on the authority and the service of why we didn't do our job. So we're certainly going to have to, I think our rates are in the game. I think the fire service nationally, I think it's over its eyes. The fire engineer issue as well is that we need to have fire engineers highly qualified. It takes 3 to 4 years to become qualified, and we have to maintain those skills. The likelihood is in the public sector, we're going to have to consider what we pay those fire engineers to retain them, because there's a big move to get those qualified people into the private sector. So what you find on occasions, and particularly down south in London, I think they're beginning to find that their fire protection staff are moving into the private sector because the salaries are higher, because we're restricted by pay scales and government pay. So there's some challenges ahead of us in terms of skills retention and what we can deploy.
Well, I mean, obviously it's a massive challenge for everyone. I do think, I mean, perhaps we ought to get our head in the game in Nottinghamshire about what we do to all of local planning authorities, so all of the councils, city, county, and all of our district and boroughs planning authorities. I mean, as a statutory consultee, they always have a pallo if it's the right thing to do. And I guess that wouldn't be onerous for those authorities to have a fire consultee if it was appropriate, and if it's a large build or a tower block or something like that. The challenge would be the resource for us to be looking at dozens of planning applications that are coming over our desk. And I think more than that is what you've said about the outsourcing of building control and those sorts of things into the private sector. When councils are doing it, we've got an easier link in, but if there's 24 private companies who are signing off if the hole in the wall's big enough or not. But I don't know what all those gaps are for us to fill, but I mean, I sit on the National Fire Board of the LGA. I mean, Michael's got a headway into there, but perhaps if there are things like that where we can spot a challenge, we can take it up through the LGA to look at national lobbying and legislation like that, but they're big problems.
I think that's certainly a challenge local authority in terms of building control, because they've obviously got their competence framework as well and what they need to go to. It's that broader, how do you licence everybody else that's in the game? And it is very complicated. I think Dave Julianakis' report was very good. It was probably an overcomplicated system. I think as I'm looking forward with optimism but challenge about where am I seeing it simplified so far though.
Lots of food for thought. It'd be useful, obviously. This is not going to go away, as you say. It's going to be a big thing for us to keep watching briefly.
Very much, yeah.
Is there anything else on this before we move forward? I do think we ought to definitely minute as well our committee's thanks for all the work done during the particular COVID parts. I think there's been an enormous amount of partnership work, even in my own district's leisure centres, that all the asymptomatic testing was all done by the fire service. There was enormous amounts of work. I don't think 4 or 5 paragraphs can come near to encapsulating what the teams did, so I think we should definitely recognise the enormous work there. If there's nothing else, thank Mick for all of that, and we'll move on then to, it's just for members to probably note this report if everyone's happy with it. We'll move on to item 5, which starts at page 17, which is the update from the areas for improvement, and that's Craig, please.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Again, for the members, these reports came out of our HMI inspection in 2019. This was introduced as part of the change and reform programme for the fire sector, where they wanted an independent inspection of fire services. We used to have some time ago, well over a decade ago, and they stopped, and they were more sector-led quality assurance and peer challenges that were done through government office. It was decided that we'd have this inspection. HMI of Constabularies has now become a Master's Inspector of Constabularies Fire and Rescue Services, so it's that sort of that principle of having that learning and that centralised focus on continuous improvement. And that's in my mind, is this is about continuous improvement for the public, what their services they see in complete transparency about how we are performing. The service is required improvement overall, and it got 24 areas for improvement. That report was brought back to Fire Authority, and it was agreed that each individual committee would break down, if the focus of the Community Safety Committee would pick up the more community safety service delivery as scrutiny to make sure actually these were being signed off. This report covers, I guess, really the last two of the areas for improvement. One is asking for the closure of Area for Improvement 4, and one is asking for an extension, AFI 9. In your report, so 2.4 and 2.4 covers those ones there. So AFI 9 is basically the mobile data terminals that are on fire engines, so where firefighters can access information about buildings. So if there is something around ACN cladding of a high-rise property, we will have done site-specific risk information visits, and there will be a tactical plan for crews. And those tactical plans are available on those mobile data terminals. They can access other things on there as well, so things like vehicle data, so we can get information around the vehicle when we're cutting it up at a road traffic collision. Where is best to cut it for fire crews? and also chemical information and those kind of things when they go through chemical incident. So there's still some work. The report is asking for them to support an extension of that. That is somewhat slightly problematic in terms of trying to get those fixed because we're so reliant on Sistel, our mobilising supplier, and they've got part of the contractors, they've got mobile data terminals, and we are having some problems around those terminals. But through service delivery, we are actually trying to put, we have put some measures in place. So they do have mobile tablets, so computers as well, but we're now trying to see whether they can replicate the data. So if the mobile data terminal doesn't work, the operational crews can actually use the computer that we provide them as well as a backup method. And equally so as well, where it's a larger job and one device doesn't work, there are other vehicles there that we can use as a command point, using data terminals. I'm not going to make light of it though. Does it give me concern? Yes, because it has the potential to create risk for firefighters and not our ability to not give the best service to the public. Do I feel that we've got measures in place at the moment that can mitigate that? Yes, but I'm not going to be happy until we've solved it. So there's an extension there, Chair, in terms of AFI 9. AFI 4 was about making sure that we were ensuring that we were targeting our prevention activity to those most at risk. And there's a report also attached on the agenda that talks about safe and well update that supports the closure of AFI 4. So I don't propose to go any more, Chair, since you've got an individual report on it, if that's okay, unless there are any questions.
Okay, members, any comments, questions? Are we?
No, we've touched on it before in terms of the mobile device, and I think it's connected to them going down or when they leave a fire station in terms of the signal, etc. So it's just a concern. Obviously, it's taken some time to sort out. Obviously, it's to do with equipment and coverage. I get that. And is there any particular areas where they're failing of the county then? Where I'm not saying it's like Wi-Fi reception. You know what I mean? Where you go out to somewhere that's much further away.
I wouldn't sort of say I'm able to show you a heat map and sort of say, look, it's worse here than there. I think anecdotally when I talk to staff, it seems like I get more anecdotes from more rural places. It seems like, but again, I've got nothing evidential that sort of prove that. But that does then support other things around access to Wi-Fi, fibre, broadband in more rural communities, city-wise. It doesn't seem to be as much of an issue. I think what we might notice in the city, because they go out more, it's reported more in the city. But when I see incidents of interest, so I'll get an email or a message to say this is what we've gone to. I do routinely see NDT failure. Now that's not always a case that the NDT has actually failed. Sometimes that is the change from the station's wireless network to actually picking up a network, and it's the point where they're actually trying to mobilise, so they think the NDT's failed. I think we now understand the problem better. Assistant Chief Officer Breedinell is actually leading a piece of work, and that's part of the reason asking for the extension. And we're all trying to work closely with Sistel. I understand they've had more parts and more replacement devices now are actually being delivered. And it's not just an issue to ourselves, it's also Derbyshire and Leicestershire as well. I don't know exactly is it a greater or lesser degree, but that is certainly a focus. And those Sistel are trying to put engineer capacity into the UK because they are beginning to win or seem to be winning more contracts for other fire and rescue services. So it's not gone away as quickly as I would have liked it to or would have planned it to. And it's certainly got very much a focus in terms of Assistant Chief Fire Officer because it's more for the sort of technical ICT side of it. So we are hoping and planning that by the autumn we'll have got either some improvement to a point where we're content with. Because of course Sistel is a contract with Sistel for a period of time, and there'll be another contract. We'll be starting to scope and contract for a replacement of the mobilising system over the coming months. And we've already started having preliminary discussions about who's going to be involved in that. Is it tri-service, joint control? So there's some contractual things as well and replacement programmes underway as well.
Okay. Anything else? Great. So are we happy with the recommendations on page 20? There are two separate ones, which are the closure of Area 4 and then the extension of Area 9 to the 30th of September. Are we all happy with those as reported? All right. Perfect. Thank you very much. We are unanimous in that. And we're moving on to page 21, which is the Safe and Well Visit Review Outcomes, which Craig just spoke about. And Craig, I'll hand it over to you again.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. In terms of the background, and I made the comment earlier, we're very much focused on making every contact count. And sometimes when you're going into somebody's home, that sometimes can be a singular focus. So we might go into a property and just look at it from an operational, if we're responding to a fire here. The move has been very much with Erin, Sean and Colin about, well, prevention, protection and response. When we're visiting a property at risk or a place or people, making sure that we consider the other factors as well. Just because a person may not be vulnerable by how they live, they may be vulnerable in a property because of how it's managed or built. So that's the sort of thing in terms of the built environment, the impact on the sort of population we have. There's a bit of a history around safe and well visits. They were originally home fire safety risk assessments, and then became home safety checks, and then the national, the sort of terminology moved to safe and well visits. So I wouldn't want you to think that we've only been doing them since 2018. I was doing home fire safety risk assessments when I was in the fire engine, and that now is some years ago. And so we've been doing this work in the community for a very, very long time. Majesty's Inspector for 2.1, to give some context, when they came to see us, we were doing 3.3 safe and well visits per 1,000 population against a national average of 10. That clearly doesn't make the fire service in Nottinghamshire look very busy in terms of safe and wells. And hence why in the last couple of years, in terms of service delivery, I sort of set the goal, and with Mick, he's been obviously setting those goals. So we went to 6,000 and we'll set a target to complete 6,000 when I first took over. We're actually heading towards 8,000, so we burst our target, but yet still below the average. But we can see, I would like to believe, the numbers are significant improvement in that 12-month period. And then obviously we targeted 9,000, and due to COVID, we were unable to complete 5,890. When I read it back now and say only in a COVID environment, I actually should be a lot prouder, I think, of the service about actually what we did, and the numbers might suggest. I think in my mind I've got, we wanted to be at 9,000, and actually I needed to kind of realise the context that staff were operating. One of the challenges that service delivery in terms of their managers have got is about how many visits we should do. There is some question about how fire rescue services record safe and wells. So some services record it, safe and wells, based on the number of persons that they do a safe and well on in a house, as opposed to the number of visits to the house. So we clearly do one visit to a house, but there might be 4 people in it. Well, is that now 4 safe and well visits then? And that's how some services actually do it. So we're doing some work on that. Currently, we're investing in our database system that's kind of referenced in here a couple of times, so that we can actually record it. My expectation is we'll still do 12,000 visits, but that could equate to 15, 18,000, 19,000 safe and wells, because we're actually targeting the persons in the property, and it's very much about the vulnerable person. So in terms of direction of travel, we hope, and again, Sean, he referenced earlier, we've started the safe and wells again. We're just about doing in the last couple of months 1,000 a month, so it appears that we're roughly on target, give or take a bit of percentage, and those figures will be reported through to members anyway on further future reports. So the ambition is there to do that. We've had the review by Nottingham University that a lot of this report is done about the effectiveness of it, and they've come out and said the profile actually does seem to work in terms of identifying persons at risk. But clearly, as I said earlier, if you're in a high-rise property, you might have a perfectly well-run home. You're kind of in work. You're not drug and alcohol dependent. So there are some of the risk factors that's to it, and you don't consider yourself at risk. But the building you might be in might be placing you at risk because of the way it's built, managed, or otherwise. So 2.4 talks about the Safer Community Strategy. That's due to run out as the Services Strategic Plan is replaced next year. This week we've started having discussions around the next Safer Community Strategy and what we're going to focus on. And I'm pretty sure it will focus on very, very similar areas, just be updated, because we'd like to think we understand what risk is in the county and the city. 2.6 talks about the quality target of safe and well visits referred to as partners, the 80% quality target, and again that is something we are targeting. There's lots there about the child profile in between, and again, a reference to Nottingham University. 2.11 talks about a customer survey that we do. So those persons who have had safe and well visits, we dip sample in terms of their experience of us as a fire and rescue service and what they felt about the visit. And it said that 96% of respondents did not think the quality of service could have been improved. I suppose it depends on what the individual's got as safe and well visits to benchmark against, I guess. But that still reflects in terms of the way our staff are being received in somebody's home. And we are looking at other ways that we can make sure that the quality is hitting the right people. We will look at, as it said there, around KPIs around that as well, to make sure that those are staying relevant and we are focusing on the right areas. And again, that will be something that we look at as the performance framework around the next community safety strategy. 2.13 talks about budgets there. Clearly there's an impact in terms of productivity. This is basically what we're saying here, is that we've gone from delivering so many and it costing us so much to wanting to deliver more. Well, that's going to have a cost implication. That must also have an implication on our partners as well, that sometimes is missed. We may find safeguarding issues or other issues through social, child, adult care services that actually needs referrals, and that obviously puts a burden on our partners. And we need to make sure we work in the localities with our partners, and that's what we will be focusing on, very much about the impact on our partners as well. Any input there in terms of the budgets, that'll be working with service delivery with Becky Smethers in terms of the finance officer and treasurer, and they'll be starting to plot those in. So we will be saying for next year we'll be doing 12 or 15,000. What is that likely to cost? This is the budget we need. And again, we'll hopefully be able to bring some impact back to members as well. I think this is a budget for me that's a good thing that we spend, because that's actually showing that we're getting into the numbers. And we are starting to see actually the people we're meeting of higher risk or those with a disability, the numbers are comparing really well, and some of that information is contained within the report as well. Equality Impact Assessment 216, the Group Manager for Prevention has completed a new thorough equality impact assessment. Our communities are definitely changing, particularly if I look around the city, it's changing quite rapidly in all honesty, and we want to make sure actually that those particularly protected characteristics are getting the service they require. There is still some challenges, I think, and some questions of the service about those communities that are hard to reach or are minority communities. Are we really targeting those areas? And that is a challenge also around our fire protection as well. So where it may be businesses that are run by BAME communities, are we spending a lot of time in those proportionate to where we may be spending time in other communities, and do we really actually know our risk? And that will be something really through the strategic plan and the assessment of risk that we'll start to have a look a bit more thoroughly. So EIA has been completed, and that comes with an action plan. You'll see on Appendix A, Chair, and Appendix B, you've got the Charlie matrix. That's really just for members to try and give you a little bit more context and understanding about those factors that contribute to vulnerability in a domestic setting for an individual. Those things, well, if there's somebody at significant risk, we'll do some interventions with partners, but that may also affect our response to that property. So where we do get a call to that property, we know how vulnerable they are. There'll be information to fire crews, and they'll know that we're going to somebody that may have mobility issues, for example. They may live upstairs in a bedroom only with mobility issues, so that will start framing the minds of crews that they're going to somebody with particular needs at that incident. So we do try to make sure we share that information across the three functions. And say the equality impact assessment is attached for information just about how thorough we're trying to be around the equality of the services that we provide to our communities. And that's probably what I'd like to cover. So there's obviously a lot of information within the report. If there is any questions now, or if there's anything after when members, it might come to mind.
Okay, I think it's a great report, Craig. I think you've probably got to be a little less hard on yourself for numbers this year, because we couldn't do at the district council. We couldn't even get in to do gas safety checks, the annual stuff on people, and we went to the government back on it. And they said, "Oh, just cut the gas off outside if you can't get people's homes." People were terrified about having somebody in the house. So I think the numbers are great. I think they're ambitious for next year. I think it'd be nice to have a benchmark about whether it's homes or people, because clearly if it's people, we're going to smash the national 10%. But I think it's all heading in the right direction.
I think on that one, Chair, I think it's the, there's a tendency to use the excuse for not comparing apples with apples, nationally. I kind of get that argument. But I think the direction of travel, I'm heartened by the direction of travel. And if actually being in the game means we're going to record people through the one person's module and it brings us more in line nationally, I would at least want us to see, maybe not for the next HMI report because of the data that will be collected, but I'd like to see certainly the HMI after that, we're at least above the national average, if not level with it. And that seems a bit like mediocrity a little bit there. We're always aiming for the average, or we aimed for compliance, and I'm certainly not aiming for compliance. I'm aiming to exceed compliance and do a lot better.
Yeah, well, I get that. I mean, we're not aiming for mediocrity, are we? We're just
No.
aiming to deliver the best service that we can. And it's a gear change, so it's obviously going to take time. I think we should be proud of that movement.
Yeah.
Members, any questions, comments?
No.
Fantastic. So that's just for us to note that report. And that's it. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you, officers, for being here. Thank you, public, who are watching. I can't imagine this sways of you, but thank you if you've sat through this.